Shabbat Shalom. I got sick quite a bit when I was a kid, and that meant I was often home during the middle of the day, no internet back then, so you ended up just getting parked on the sofa with a blanket over you, some chicken soup, and Perry Mason reruns. But hey, Perry Mason reruns. I learned how to be a lawyer from Perry Mason. Well, sort of. You see, it turns out that the real world doesn't quite work the way Perry Mason works. I don't know if this reference is working for everybody here. Perry Mason, of course, he would bring in and have all the arraignment, and there would always be the surprise witness that would blow apart the case of the prosecution and get his client off because they were innocent. And the real culprit would be clearly exposed by the end of the show, and everyone could go home happy. But that's not the way it normally works in the average court case. You don't normally get a smoking gun in the hand of the criminal saying, "I'm glad I killed them, I do it again," in front of unimpeachable witnesses. When I sat on a grand jury here in Orlando, must have been like 8-10 years ago almost now, I discovered that when murder trials are being held, the evidence is usually a lot thinner than that, circumstantial evidence, as they call it. And it is much harder for a prosecutor to make the case that indeed, beyond a reasonable doubt, Mr. A killed Mr. B. And it is nothing like the neat, tied-up court case like Perry Mason. Which is why we should also be looking at the court case in The Hague with similar scrutiny. We should not expect this to go Perry Mason style. That is to say, we should not expect things to be crystal clear from either side, because that's not how court cases work. It's not how lawyers get paid. Making things clear doesn't give as many billable hours. And so we're going to see a great deal of controversy, and hopefully you've already been watching the opening arguments between the two different sides. Let me back up. I just realized I made an awfully large assumption that everybody knew that there's a court case currently going on in The Hague that might interest us. Are people aware of this?
Yes.
What's the case?
South Africa versus Israel for genocide.
South Africa versus Israel for genocide. That is to say, South Africa has brought a case to the International Court of Justice accusing Israel of committing genocide, and Israel decided to respond. Rather than boycotting the proceedings, Israel came and has begun laying out their case against it. But in order to understand this as something more than just posturing and propaganda as usual, what actually would be involved in proving genocide? Right? Okay, let's do the easy Perry Mason version of genocide. Right? How do we know that the Holocaust was genocide? Is it just because there were 6 million dead people?
Intent.
No. Intent. How do we know there was intent?
Words.
What's that? They got a conference. Hitler wrote a book about it, for crying out loud. Right? This was not subtle. He gave campaign speeches about eradicating Jews. This was not subtle at all. And of course, the manner in which it was carried out also displays intent, which is to say, you put together extermination camps for a civilian population. The population goes into those camps alive, comes out of those camps dead, and this has provided no net benefit to the government that is perpetrating these crimes. We've got a pretty good reason to argue that this is genocide. So I'm introducing here something I want to get us onto because it's going to be a very important element, which is that may be the textbook version of genocide, the Perry Mason tied up in a bow version of genocide, where it is incontrovertible except for those that have their own other agendas, and there are Holocaust deniers, unfortunately. But even among the Holocaust deniers, they don't deny that if it happened the way it's described, it was genocide. They deny that it didn't happen at all or in very different ways. There's a difference there. Right? They're not saying it wouldn't be genocide. They're saying it didn't happen, therefore it wasn't. Playing with English is a pastime. So, what happens when you don't have the textbook version? What happens when you don't have a political leader that publishes a book proclaiming their desire to kill a population? who campaigns on their desire to kill a population, who orchestrates conferences and government bureaucracies in order to kill a population, who builds an infrastructure to kill a population, and then who kills a population. When you don't have all of that, does that mean it's not genocide? And that is the tricky part. Right? We are very much used to this super high bar of what genocide looks like. And unfortunately, genocide can happen even if it is not laid out with the methodical precision of Nazi Germany. And it can be genocide, whether or not there have been the same types of books published, conferences held, campaign rallies, or mechanized extermination techniques. For example, it is fairly well accepted that there was a genocide in Rwanda. Now, the genocide in Rwanda, did it involve mechanized train systems to death camps? No. How were most of the murders in Rwanda perpetrated? By machete, by a large knife. Neighbor against neighbor, literally, going and butchering people that were part of the wrong tribe, the wrong group. Well, how do we know that was genocide rather than just mass murder? What makes it genocide rather than merely murder or civil war? See, this is the important distinction. That there will be, and have been, wars since the beginning of time, and, well, there will eventually be a stop to that because we believe very strongly in God's prophecies, but for the foreseeable future, wars are likely to continue. What makes a difference between war and genocide? Two planes flying over two different cities, both of them drop bombs. One of them might be genocidal, one of them might be merely carrying out the instruments of war. How do we tell the difference? The elbow room that the Germans were looking for is not the official capacity. In fact, that argument of the Lebensraum among the Germans was used not to justify the Holocaust, but to justify their annexation of other territories. And that is actually more normal, historically speaking. I mean, as much as anything the Nazis did can be called normal. The idea that one country might want to take over another country for land, for power, for resources, that's as old as Australopithecus hitting some other guy with a rock. That goes way, way back in our ancestry. But genocide does not. Genocide is a relatively new invention. So what makes genocide genocide? You use the word intent, but intent to what? Because in any war, I intend to kill my enemy. That's what makes it war rather than just a nasty pushing and shoving contest.
To destroy a group of people based on their ethnic or religious identity.
All right, to destroy a group of people, again, we're still in war, that's normal, based upon their religion or their ethnicity or their other identity markers. Now, what is novel about that is that your intent is not, I want to take their land. Your intent is not, I want to take their stuff. Your intent is not, I want to defend myself from their armies. Your intent is, I want this group of people dead. Why? Because they are them. Now, I know we live in the shadow of World War II, and we unfortunately still live with much rhetoric of people speaking in this way, of the ultimate expressions of hate and of intolerance for people that bear characteristics that other groups might not like. And so we take it as being perfectly normal that someone out there might want to obliterate another group of people for no reason other than their peoplehood. But that is bizarre. Right? Historically, that is atypical. You don't go back and see the Romans saying, we're going to go attack the people of Germania because they're blonde, or because they wear more furs than we do. They attacked them because they wanted their land, they wanted their stuff, or they wanted to stop the Germans from cross-raiding into the areas that Rome had already taken. No one ever said, let's just obliterate all the Germans. They said, let's pacify them. Let's stop their attacks. Let's take their stuff. And again, historically, over and over again, conquering armies have conquered not in the name of extermination, but in the name of exploitation. And that's perfectly normal. It's not great, don't get me wrong, right? The motivation doesn't make it a righteous cause, but it makes it substantially different than genocide. So this is going to sound weird, bear with me, don't take this cut out of YouTube and misquote me. So what's so bad about genocide? Right? At the end of the day, aren't the people dead? If I invade a country in order to take their resources, and I end up killing half the population in order to force them to submit to me, and on the other hand, I invade a country because I really don't like the color of their eyes, and I end up killing half the population before I am eventually stopped or run out of steam, half the country's dead. What's the difference between my genocidal attempt in the second version and my business as usual, that's how wars work in the first version? Why should one get labeled with a special title? Why should one be elevated to the pantheon of ultimate evil as opposed to, well, that's what countries do? Why is genocide wrong?
It's convenient to put a moral issue on it.
It's convenient to put a moral issue on it, indeed, and this is part of why South Africa is trying to use the genocidal label in The Hague in order to try and smear Israel in a way that is different than simply saying, we don't think there should be fighting. But by putting this genocidal label, they are elevating Israel into the pantheon of evil, which creates a moral smearing of the issues. Absolutely true. But let's assume that we're not talking just about Israel and South Africa, because before we can get into that, we have to understand the concepts in general. All of us, I'm sure, instinctually know that genocide is bad, and that genocide is worse than just normal military killing in the course of war. No, it's not. Why not?
Because it's just a word and excuse to create more hate.
It's just a word and an excuse to create more hate. Is that why Israel and Jewish organizations around the world continue to look out for cases of genocide and advocate against genocidal behavior? I will say that I understand, I think, your position, that in the current context, the word genocide has been stripped of so much meaning that it begins to feel like just another buzzword to use against people I don't like. That ironically it becomes a statement of intolerance rather than a statement against intolerance. However, in the abstract, stripped of the current context of what's going on in The Hague, is genocide not bad? I mean, is it not worse than regular wars?
Well, I think, you know, what is really, before the meaning of it has been so, I would say, perverted in modern times, where, as others have said, it's used sometimes for geopolitical convenience. Through genocide, if we go to the Nazis, is you're denying the basic humanity of the people you want to wipe out. The Nazis described the Jews as subhuman, and to me, that goes to the heart of what an actual genocide would be.
So in the build-up to a genocidal act, it is typical for a group such as the Nazis, being, again, the paradigm, but not the exclusive holder of this title, to dehumanize whomever it is they are about to attack. The Nazis wanted to rile up the population, and so, of course, the Jews are depicted as despicable, subhuman creatures, vermin, and polluting the blood of the nation, and other such terminology that was rampant at the time. And that was meant to excuse the slaughter that was about to come, because after all, no one bats an eyelash when you get rid of a rat infestation. It's considered a public service. So if you can describe your enemies as rats, then that's perfectly fine as well. However, I will push back, because that's partly my job. Most wars involve a copious amount of dehumanizing of the enemy. If you go back and look at the propaganda posters, films, or even Looney Tunes cartoons during the 1940s, during World War II, I can tell you that there's an awful lot of dehumanizing, especially against the Japanese, somewhat against the Germans, but especially against the Japanese, that we should not as a nation be exactly proud of. But does that mean that when we firebombed Tokyo, we were trying to commit genocide? Doesn't feel like the right sentence, does it? I mean, when we nuked Hiroshima, was that an attempt at genocide? Well, no, because we're still missing out that intent. Now, what is the difference then between a general fighting war, murdering a bunch of people, and a genocidal attack? Remember my example before? Two different countries invade. One country wants the resources. They subjugate the population, kill half of them, and now they've got their treasure. The other wants to murder the population because of their eye color. They end up murdering half the population, and then for whatever reason, they're stopped. But they did it for genocidal reasons, not for loot. Now, we might want to say death is death, therefore there's no difference, but there is a substantial difference, and it has to do with what comes next. If you are dealing with a genocide, then the securing of military objectives, strategic objectives, infrastructure, resource objectives will not be sufficient. What is the objective of genocide? Wipe out the population. What is the objective of war? Well, like I said, it can be to defend yourself, to take resources, to secure more property, land, whatever it might be. There are some other objectives, and the deaths are merely a byproduct of those objectives. The deaths are not the objective. Make sure you understand that. When we're dealing with genocide, the death of the other is the objective. And that means that even if it comes to a stop for international intervention, your tanks run out of gas, whatever it might be, that you were not engaged in this war for the normal reasons, and thus you are not considered to be a normal actor in a conflict. You are committing genocide. You have crossed a line. As humanity, we have tolerance, perhaps a bit too much, for the use of violence to achieve political goals. War, in the general parlance. But we cringe with the novel invention beginning in the late 1800s and then picking up steam all the way through the 20th, that you would engage in violence for no other reason other than the extermination of a population. That feels fundamentally different to most human beings. Because you're not supposed to use violence just because you don't like a different group. You only use violence because you want something the other group has. Now, again, I'm not advocating for the use of violence in those places, but that has been the norm, and thus humanity was tolerant of it. It became very intolerant of the idea of extermination for other reasons, which means that when we can come back to our comparison between invasion A and invasion B, with invasion B being genocidal, when they get the opportunity to get their tanks rolling again, when the international attention has drifted away in the next 15 minutes because there's a good cat video, what will the invading forces begin to do? Start up again, slaughter more people. Why? Because that's why they are there. Now, you don't always get great speeches by the leaders of a genocidal regime saying, we're part of the genocide club, and we are here to commit genocide, and we're going to genocide as hard as we can. Most leaders have learned to avoid that type of rhetoric. They may still use inflammatory comments like we're going to wipe them out and we're going to decimate and blah, 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 but most of them have avoided tripping the obvious Nuremberg rhetoric that was so common back in Nazi Germany. Not all, but some. So we can't always rely on rhetoric. So we have to go to the walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, looks like a duck, it's a duck. So sometimes we can try to decide whether something is actually genocide based upon the actions rather than the explicit intent. And this is where things are happening in The Hague that we need to pay attention to. Because what the South African delegation is trying to argue is that while there have been the occasional statements that out of context might sound like genocidal intent from some of the various ministers of the current Netanyahu administration, their biggest evidence is, well, a lot of people have died. And since a lot of people have died, and we don't believe it's justified, therefore the reason they've died is because Israel is trying to commit genocide. Make sure you understand that logic, because that is what's going to be essential for understanding the unfolding of this case in The Hague, which is going to have repercussions not just for Israel on the international stage, but also for Jews who support Israel suddenly being labeled supporters of genocide, depending upon how this plays out. Right? The South African argument, and the argument among many against Israel, is that Israel may not have actually said they want to commit genocide. We're not going to rely upon the smoking gun of a Mein Kampf that lays this out. Netanyahu has never published anything like that. But we are still going to argue that genocide is taking place based upon the result, based upon what we see happening, rather than on what we have heard of the intent. Now, that does become a little trickier, but again, this is not Perry Mason land, so we should expect things to be a little bit messier. And the argument that they made on Thursday, and that they're going to continue to expound upon, is based upon a few simple premises, which is Israel has killed a lot of people in Gaza. That is undeniable, right? There have been casualties in the war. No argument there. But, and this is the big but that they have to interject, but that those casualties do not serve a proper, proportional military goal. If that is true, then the casualties are the point rather than a side effect of Israel's prosecution of the war. Do we see how that logic works? Right? The actions of Israel are illegitimate because it does not serve the interests of their military needs, their defense and strategic needs. Therefore, the casualties must be the goal. Therefore, genocide. Right? They can't be attacking because they want to secure things, because they've said they don't want to retake Gaza. They've said they don't want any resources. They've made it clear that that's not the intention. Therefore, the purpose of the attacks must be death. And that's called genocide. Even if it is unsuccessful, even if it is only a small proportion that are killed, even if the population overall continues to rise in Gaza or the rest of the Palestinian areas, it still counts as genocide under the definition of genocide. Because genocide is not only genocide when you succeed, it is also genocide when you try really, really hard and do cause some damage.
What is the distinction of wanting to wipe out people and wanting to wipe out a political group? For example, trying to kill Hamas, but not to kill Palestinians in general.
Okay, welcome to Israel's main rebuttal, as laid out on Friday. Let me explain for everybody who couldn't hear. What is the distinction, however, between the desire to kill an entire group of people, meaning a whole population, and the desire to kill a group of people that are actually organized against you into military groups that have perpetrated actual military action against you? That is to say, everybody agrees it's not genocide if you attack someone else because they attacked you. When the U.S. responded to the attack on Pearl Harbor, when England responded to the attacks on her sovereignty, nobody accused England or America of wanting to commit genocide against the Germans, Japanese, or anyone else involved in World War II. It was clear that this was being done for a military purpose. And even the assault of the Germans on their own, or the Japanese, most people didn't accuse them of trying to commit genocide against the Americans or the British, although against other groups, yes, but not against the Americans or British, that it was just them trying to commit war for their own strategic purposes. So how do you tell the difference between I am attacking this area because in this area are violent people who have done violence to me and who are committed to renewed violence against me as soon as they can, and I am attacking this area because I don't like the people who live in this area? How do you tell the difference? And it doesn't help when you have a particularly dense urban population where the military group that Israel is going after has very clearly and officially embedded itself, to use the sanitized word, within the civilian population, which is going to multiply the casualty of non-combatants exponentially. Because if you hide among civilians, then when you are struck for military purpose, civilians will die in larger number than if you were standing out in a nice empty barracks labeled "Army here, please bomb." All right, so I should go ahead and take care of this issue now. If we want to see an explicit version of genocide within the current Gaza conflict, well, it's very easy to prove that Hamas is committed to genocide. It's literally within their charter, it's within their rhetoric, it's within their education materials. It's about as close to a textbook case as possible. The fact that they have inadequate means to carry out their wishes doesn't mean that they're not trying to commit genocide. And indeed, their treatment of the hostages is a rather clear sign of that, as opposed, as Bernie is pointing out, to the Israeli treatment of the prisoners of war, that the Palestinians that are captured during the operation are not put up against a wall and shot. They are not held in inhumane conditions. They are handled as prisoners of war with all that that normally entails. Oops, I see a hand at the back, yes.
Yeah, I just think it's kind of ironic that the people that we all believe and think that have been playing genocide and Hamas is the ones that no one's pointing out as being the ones that being committing genocide, whereas we, Israel, is actually the one being pointed out as committing genocide. And in addition to that, you haven't mentioned it yet, but South Africa, who's doing all of this, is actually the ones who committed apartheid so many years ago.
Right, although I will point out that some people have pointed out the hypocrisy of Hamas in the element. Others have pointed out that the reason that they brought the case against Israel rather than Hamas is because at the moment it is Israel that is rolling their military forward as opposed to Hamas. So therefore the argument goes, not that I accept this, that it is Israel that is in a position to be stopped as opposed to Hamas, which is not on the offensive at the moment. That's the argument made for why target Israel with this particular claim. But as for your second point about South Africa, it should be noted that the current government of South Africa is not the government that was involved in apartheid, that this is the replacement. That doesn't mean that it's all squeaky clean and doesn't have its hands dirty in many other ways, but it is not, it's not a one-to-one, the continuation of that same institution. Yes?
Is there a formula for how many people killed in the war?
No, there is no formula for the so-called proportionality of casualties. And this is what I'm trying to wrap up with, because we do need to wrap it up, because we still have Musaf to finish, and a Kiddush, I'm sure, that's waiting for us. And by the way, you can come on my Wednesday class, where it says we need to talk, and we talk about some of these topics and many other topics. It's not all about Israel, but there are many other topics we cover. But about Israel as well, we go into more depth, because we have a little more time. But what I want to point out with all of this is that it is going to be a slog over the case that is before The Hague. That it is not going to be a slam dunk. Because from Israel's point of view, what Israel is doing is pursuing the military objectives of eradicating a military force that is embedded within a civilian population and a military force that presents a material, existential, clear and present danger to the people of Israel. And that is their goal. And that the casualties that are being inflicted upon the people of Gaza are the unfortunate but unavoidable byproduct of needing to engage in that military action. And if Israel had the capacity to push a button and all of the Hamas soldiers would fall over unconscious, they would push the button and round them up and take them to prison. But they don't, because such things don't exist. And that means that they are pursuing the war in the messy way that war happens. And the South African position, backed up by some others, is going to be that it is too much. That you may think you have the right to attack, but you have killed too many to achieve too little. Therefore, your goal must be to kill rather than to achieve. And that's going to be their position. And ultimately, it's going to be left to the court to decide. Now, I should point out that Israel is not alone in defending her actions. The United States has come out very strongly saying that there are no merits to this case. Germany has come out very strongly saying there's no merits to this case. Most of the countries around the world say that there are no merits to this case. But, and I believe that's one of the reasons why Israel feels justified and supported in coming to The Hague to answer to these claims. Yes. So we can come on Wednesday and we can talk about the double standard that exists within the world, but you're absolutely right. However, I am always hesitant to invoke the double standard card because I do believe there should be standards, and standards begin somewhere. And even if we feel there might be better places to begin, if a standard is in need of protecting, like genocide, then it's right for someone to bring an example that they believe needs to be examined. The fact that it always continues to be the Israeli state, the Jewish state, yeah, well, there's some obvious tendencies there, which we can talk about on Wednesdays if you come, but that doesn't mean we can dismiss the conversation. Because as Jews, we do have a unique position in history and a unique position in the world to make sure that the word genocide does not become stripped of all meaning, and that when genocides do happen, that we do stand up and say, this is not war as normally done. And to make sure that the world recognizes that indeed, genocide is worse than a normal battle. Because there is no option for surrender, there is no option for détente, there is no option for a ceasefire when one side wants genocide. Because the option then becomes murder. And that is something that Israel is facing, as she knows, against Hamas and many of the people that support Hamas, that they wish for genocide against Israel. So we wish Israel strength, we wish her hope, and we wish her the alliance of good nations and good people around the world, from world leaders to the rank and file of us, to make sure that this does not get completely erased, that the concept of genocide remains a poignant and powerful rallying cry against inhumanity and is not turned into a mere propaganda tool, a clouding of moral issues, and another way of attacking rather than trying to defend what is right. Shabbat Shalom.